We're here at the Jewish Museum in Walworth Road, and we're going to ask the curator of the museum to give us a brief tour of the museum and ask him a few questions.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Very pleased to see you at the Irish Jewish Museum. We have been here for over 10 years. We opened in 1985, and it is located in a former synagogue, which existed here in Walworth Road for almost 100 years. Due to the decline in the Jewish population in Ireland and in this neighbourhood, the synagogue fell into disuse, services ceased, and it closed down in the early 1970s. Following that, the building remained dormant for almost 10 years. As I was saying, a group of persons came together in the winter of 1984, and we formed the Irish Jewish Museum Committee, and we decided to renovate the old synagogue building and to turn the building into a museum. And the museum was opened in June 1985 by the then President of Israel, Chaim Herzog, who happened to be on a state visit to Ireland at the time, and who also happened to be Irish-born. And if I may show you a photograph of him, which he presented to the museum at the time of the opening. As you see, this actual section is dedicated to the Herzog family, because the Herzogs were connected with Dublin for quite a large number of years. It's interesting that when the Irish Free State was established in 1922, the Irish Jewish community decided to put its lot in with the Irish Free State and established an independent chief rabbinate, chief rabbi's office, and appointed as the first chief rabbi of Ireland, of the Irish Free State, the father of the late president. They appointed Rabbi Isaac Herzog. So from 1922 to 1937, there was a chief rabbi, Rabbi Isaac Herzog, who was the head of the Irish Jewish communities. And you have a number of the items here, letters which the late chief rabbi wrote, the house where they lived in Bloomfield Avenue. Now here we have the photographs of the various chief rabbis of Ireland from 1922 to the present time. The first chief rabbi was Rabbi Isaac Herzog, who was here as chief rabbi from 1922 to 37. And then after the war years, next chief rabbi was Emanuel Jakubowicz, who became Lord Jakubowicz. He subsequently became the chief rabbi of Great Britain. Then we had Chief Rabbi Isaac Coen from 1959 to 1979 for 20 years. Rabbi David Rosen from 1979 to 1985. Then from 1985, Rabbi Ephraim Mirvis, and about 2 years ago, Rabbi Roder was appointed, and we have him there as well. Now, if I may show you a number of other items. The synagogues in Dublin. There's the Adelaide Road Synagogue, which you have there, and that's still functioning. And then there is the Tirranur Synagogue. You have a view of it there, which is also functioning. There is the Progressive Congregation in Leicester Avenue, which has recently celebrated its Golden Jubilee. What is interesting here is that the synagogue in Greenville Hall, which is now gone, quite a magnificent one, the foundation stone was laid right at the time of the Easter Rising, as you see in April 1916. The Jewish population was never great. As you see, Ireland had 472 Jewish persons in the whole island in 1881. And then after the pogroms in Russia and the migration westward out of Russia and Eastern Europe, of course, the vast majority of Jewish people went to the United States. But a small number came to Ireland, so you had in 1891, 1,700, in 1901, 3,700, and then it peaked by 1911 at 5,000, and remained static at 5,000 right up until the end of the Second World War, when there was 5,400 approximately, and then after that, every 10 years it declined by 1,000. So we're less than 2,000 persons now. First reference to a mayor is in relation to the mayor of Youghal, William Anyas, who is Jewish, and he was elected to that position in 1555. Since then, there have been Jewish mayors in Ireland in 1898, 1899, in Belfast, Sir Otto Yaffe. In Dublin, we then had the Lord Mayor Briscoe in 1956. He was followed then subsequently by Gerald Goldberg, who became Lord Mayor in Cork in the 60s, and also one had Lord Mayor Ben Briscoe in the 1980s. So in actual fact, we've had 5 Jewish Lord Mayors or mayors in Ireland over the past 500 or so years. 3 Jewish members of Parliament at one point. First of all, you had Mervyn Taylor, who became Minister for Equality and Law Reform, and of course you have Alan Shatter, who's in the Dáil at the present time, and also Ben Briscoe, who's in the Dáil at the present time.
Is there any history of anti-Semitism in Ireland at all?
Well, of course, there have been some moments when things got rough, and there are unfortunate occasions which occurred, one in 1904 in particular in Limerick. But this is part of history in any country. But the main thing to note is that with a small Jewish population and the election of Jewish people to Parliament, it indicates in itself that there isn't outright anti-Semitism in this country at all. We find that the Jewish people were engaged in practically every sort of trade. You had Mushat, who had a chemist shop, and he made medicines and so on. You have some reviews of him and his shop here. You had people who were framers of postcards and pictures. You had a firm called Yudakin, who were scrap metal merchants. You had people who were tailors, clothing people who were rag merchants, people who were involved in photography business, people who were involved in the records and gramophone business, people who were making embroidery on cloth. If you go on to the jewellery trade, people had various jewellery shops, and they also were involved in the diamonds and measuring of rings. You have the old measurements there.
And is the Jewish community still prominent in the business sector of Dublin?
Well, not that great now, because, as I say, we are less than 2,000 people, and this would mean approximately 500 families. So when you're dealing with 500 families, you've got 500 wage earners. So basically they're in the medical profession, as lawyers. Of course, there are some in the wholesale business and have retail shops as well. But it's a very small area of the commercial world in which they are engaged in now, because of the numbers. With 500 adults, 500 families, it is very, very, very small. Therefore, the contribution can be rather small. Irish Jewish boys and girls went to other schools: St. Peter's School, St. Peter's Boys' School, St. Catherine's School. They went to Old Joe's School, I think it is there.
So there was a large number of Jewish.
Well, of course, when you have a population, as we saw, of 3,000 to 5,000 in the 20s, 30s, it was necessary to have children going to some school. But eventually, it was found that with the growth of young Jewish boys and girls, that it would be useful to open our own school, a Jewish day school, and a lease was signed with the National Education Commissioners, and the Jewish Zion National Schools was opened in 1935, and the foundation stone was laid in 1932. And that school continued to function until after the war, and then they went and they opened in Terranure, Rathgar area, Stratford College, and Stratford College still continues to function.
And what would be the difference in the curriculums of a Jewish school to, say, an ordinary?
Well, the curriculum would be the same as in any national school, because they have to sit their intercert, leaving cert, and other examinations. They have to get the matriculation into university, and they have to take their careers in the university. So there's no doubt that the curriculum would have to be the same. But the emphasis would be the atmosphere, would be in the atmosphere. It would be the more Jewish atmosphere in the school building, in the environment. And that is the only difference that would be significant.
If I could just draw your attention to this embroidery, could you explain briefly?
Yes, well, it's very interesting that this is an embroidered cloth made in 1950 by the Dublin Daughters of Zion. It was a charitable organization, and it's clear that way back in 1900 they started their charitable work, and when their Golden Jubilee came in 1950, they had a big stall. They had a special celebration, and one of them included a cloth where everyone signed their name on, different women. It was a women's society, signed their name, and some other woman embroidered the cloth.
Hello and welcome. Today in the studio we are delighted to have Dr. Joe Briscoe, who is a representative of the Jewish community. Joe, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Joe, could you tell us exactly what your position in the Jewish community is?
Yeah, well, I'm spokesperson or spokesman for the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland. So basically I deal with public affairs and items such as this.
Joe, it's been noted over the few years that have gone by that the Jewish community has actually decreased in numbers. There was figures given there last week from 4,500 to, that was in the mid-40s, to a figure now of 1,500. How do you contribute this decline?
Yeah, it is. It's dreadful. But you mustn't judge it just as Dublin. I mean, small communities all over the world are getting smaller, and large communities, the very large ones, are getting larger. So it's a worldwide situation. It's not just here. But basically, the reason for it is that the young people feel or felt that they have more opportunity abroad than here. Emigration has been the curse of this country, and the Jewish community is a microcosm of the community at large. So all the factors that were affecting all the young people of Ireland, of course, affected the Jewish young people. We're all Irish, we happen to be Jewish, but it was an Irish problem, and it wasn't just a Jewish problem. So you have this going away. Now, as the young people left, then it became critical, because there were no more young people left in the community for marriage, to find partners for life, that sort of thing. So they left for those reasons. So one thing on top of another, they left. And then, of course, with the advent in 1948 of the State of Israel, about 25% of the community went to Israel, because they felt that from a Jewish point of view, from a Jewish heritage point of view, that they had a greater chance there. It's interesting to note that one of the reasons that this happened was because of the acceptance of Jews. You'll always get Jews assimilated where there is no or very little anti-Semitism. Exactly. I'm not talking about anti-Jewish prejudice, I'm talking about anti-Semitism. And there is no history of anti-Semitism in Ireland, absolutely none. I mean, 100 years ago, there was a little bit of a riot down in Limerick, and everybody throws this up every so often. But in point of fact, it should not be judged out of context. Ireland has a tremendous record. Ireland is the only country in Europe where not one single Jew has ever lost his life because of this.
And that's very nice to know.
You know, that didn't happen in England, it didn't happen in any other country. So it's something that I'm very proud of, and I sort of announce that with a megaphone wherever I go in the world.
And where do you see the Jewish community in Dublin and in Ireland as a whole in the, say, future, the next 10 or 20 years?
Well, in the next 10 or 20 years, it'll be, I think, there won't be any dramatic change in the next 10 or 20 years. But if you look at the age profile of our community at the moment, it's awful, because the 60-70% of the community would be above the age of 55. So that means that in 25 years, say, if this continues, you're going to have a community here of maybe 400 or 500.
And an interesting point, do you see the secularisation of Ireland affecting the Jewish community in any way, perhaps?
Not really. Judaism, it's a sort of a mystery to people who aren't Jews. And but basically, it's, to me personally, and to a lot of other people, it's more a way of life than an actual religion. And it's I don't think you obviously you have young people, most of our young people in fact, who would not particularly keen on going to the synagogue every week and the various other things like that. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, when it comes down to say something like the Passover or Yom Kippur fast or something like that, they then will very few sort of throw that last link. So I don't think that there's any rebellion as such against religion. It's a very loose religion. You can take, I call myself, people ask me, I say that I'm an Orthodox Jew as distinct from a progressive Jew. But because I'm Orthodox doesn't mean that I'm going to fill into that role model that possibly you have in your mind of an Orthodox Jew who wears peculiar dress and has beards and things hanging down and various other things and that. I mean, I do things that I shouldn't do. I drive my car on the Sabbath and that. I'm not. I don't keep everything strictly as a fully Orthodox Jew would.
Right. I'm sure there's a lot of people now watching that aren't totally familiar with the entire Jewish community and all its sort of activities. In particular, we had researchers trying to find this out. What exactly is Zionism?
Yeah, well, you see, it's interesting. It's a very good question, because Zionism refers to Mount Zion, which is in Jerusalem. And Mount Zion was the site of the temple. The temple was finally destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. And about 400 or 500 years later, the Muslims built a mosque on the site of our most holy temple. That would explain to you what there's all the row about Jerusalem.
Exactly.
Now, Jerusalem is the whole centrality of Judaism is Jerusalem. Everybody knows, for instance, and I'm sure you're well aware, that when Muslims pray, they face towards Mecca. Well, what you may not be aware of is that when Jews pray, they face towards Jerusalem. All the synagogues are positioned that they face east, so that when you're saying your prayers and you're in front of the ark, and that you're facing towards Jerusalem.
I wasn't aware of that, actually.
So this possibly will take the thing that we don't have just a political situation, it's a religious situation. It says in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that if I should forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right arm lose its power. Literally, it would be better that your right arm fell off that you should forget Jerusalem. So that's why.
They believe in it that much.
It also would explain to you why the fundamentalists, and when one talks of fundamentalism, you shouldn't just think of Muslims or anything like that. I think we all have our fundamentalists. I think there's Jewish fundamentalists as well as Muslim fundamentalists. There's also Christian fundamentalists. So that when you get to fundamentalists, you just can't talk. I mean, you know, that's something that they accept without question, and it's a very, very difficult situation.
Is there a large Zionistic movement in Ireland at present, or was there, or will there be?
There's, because of the fact, you see, to me personally, I think that I'm speaking personally now, that I am a very, very fortunate person. For 2,000 years, the Jews have said, we will go back to Israel, we will go back to Palestine, we'll go back to the homeland, we will have a homeland. And everybody laughed. I mean, the idea of the Jews scattered all over the world actually going back there was crazy. But the religious people said, no, it says it in the Bible that eventually we will go back. And this has happened in my time. I mean, I have been to Jerusalem, I have touched the wall, which was the foundation of the temple. And as I did that, I had this funny feeling going through me that I was doing this not just for myself, but for my late father, for my uncles, for all my ancestors before me who had suffered and everything else all over the world. And here was I. I mean, I was one of the fortunate few that had actually witnessed this. The Passover ceremony, which we have at Easter time, the very last sentence says, and I may say it in Hebrew, Lashana Habab Yerushalayim, which means in English, next year we will celebrate in Jerusalem. And you know, we used to say this. I mean, as a kid we said it. Well, we said it because it was something to say, but actually, it actually happened. And that is considered by a lot of people, including myself, and I'm not an overtly religious person, I'm not a crowd thumper, as being very close to miraculous. I mean, all the odds were against the Jews going back, and they're back. They now have a homeland. When I was a child, sometimes when I was in school, kids would say, go back to Palestine. You never hear that now. It's an interesting.
And just to take you up there on a word you said your past life you were very fortunate in. Now you actually have a good history, don't you? A very close relative of yours was mayor of
Well, that was my father, yeah.
Your father, indeed, yeah.
Well, you know, first of all, may I say that I'm Jewish.
Right.
But I'm Irish first.
First and
I'm
foremost.
Irish and Jewish. And this is something which I have no problem with. Maybe some other people might have a problem, sort of say, well, if he's Jewish, he couldn't be Irish, and that sort of thing. But as far as I'm concerned, that's their problem, not mine. My grandfather came to this country and got from a country called Lithuania, and he was a refugee from that country. He came here about 1865, 1870, just over 100 years ago, and he settled down here. And my father was born here, and it's an interesting story. I hope I don't bore you, but my grandfather used to make brushes. That was his trade, and he used to peddle these brushes around the country, and he used to stay with the farmers. I mean, there was no question staying in hotels. He used to stay with the Irish farmers, and he realised how much that the oppressed Irish Catholic peasant had in common with the oppressed Jews from the country that he had come from. I mean, it was quite fantastic. And he became quite enthusiastic about Irish nationalism, which accounts for the fact that my father was called Robert.
Right.
His second initial was E. So I won't tell you who Robert E. Briscoe was after. And my late uncle was W. Wolfe T. Briscoe. So, I mean, my grandfather really, well, you know, that was it. And if Jews are given half a chance in a country, they are very, very good citizens of that country. It's quite amazing. I mean, the number of Jews who in the German army in the First World War who were awarded the Iron Cross, first class, which is almost like the Victoria, is quite fantastic. There's a great story about one very patriotic German Jew, and he just couldn't believe what was happening. And it's a long story, but eventually they went up to his room and they found him in bed in his uniform with his Iron Cross, all his decorations, and he had committed suicide. So yes, we have a long history of being good
Irish.
Very nice
history too,
yeah. So my father was very active in the IRA, not the present ones from 1917, and then he was a founder member of the Fianna Fáil party. He was on the run during the Civil War. He was a founder member of Fianna Fáil. He was in the Dáil from 1927 until 1965, when my brother took over. My brother now is continuing in my father's tradition, and the Briscoes have held a seat in the Dáil for 70 years without a break, which is the record, which is fantastic. It's a great tribute also to Ireland, because it was not Jews who elected him.
Dr. Briscoe, I have to say you've had a great history and you've really given the people an insight into the Jewish community, and you've been a great help. Dr. Briscoe, thank you very much.
I see the decline continuing. It is very regrettable that this will occur. However, I cannot see now that there will be any reversal of the trend which commenced 20, 30 years ago. The trend commenced with young people emigrating, and then professionals emigrating, and it has continued. The young people went away because they couldn't obtain work here. They couldn't obtain jobs. They couldn't obtain a livelihood. That meant there were less marriages. That meant, in turn, there were less births. And this has remained a constant feature in the Irish Jewish community over the last 30 years. Since then, in the most recent past, you have the parents of those young people who emigrated approximately 30 years ago. They are now retiring from their work, from their jobs, and they are saying, we don't wish to live out our lives alone in Ireland. We would rather be with our children and grandchildren. So you have even the elderly adults leaving at the present time and going to be with their children and grandchildren. And they are Jewish people, Irish Jewish people are scattered throughout the world. They're in San Diego in California. They're in Toronto in Canada. They are in New York in the United States, and also in Chicago and Detroit and Boston in the United States. They are in England, in Manchester and London. They are in Israel. They are in South Africa. They are in Australia. So in actual fact, there is an Irish Jewish diaspora now in many places in the world. So I envisage the decline further of the numbers of the Irish Jewish community. I see a contraction will continue. I see that we will be left with maybe just one synagogue, and that the Irish Jewish Museum will be one of the places where all the history of the Irish Jewish community will be located for the benefit of people who wish to research, study, and obtain some knowledge about events that occurred in Ireland over the past 100 or more years.
Lose mir schon Jankale mein Scheiner, die Egelach, die Schwarzenke macht zu. A Jingele, was hat schon alle Zeindala, muss noch die Mame singen, ay Lulu. A Jingele, was hat schon alle Zeindala.